Welcome to an emergency edition of the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. This is a Saturday, and it's we're in the middle of the afternoon. It's Shabbat. Ordinarily, we wouldn't do a podcast on a Saturday. We wouldn't do a podcast on a Shabbat. But of course, the United States is at war, has struck Iran together with Israel, and we are here to try to bring some illumination to that. And by we, I mean executive editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
And joining us is contributing editor and big poobah at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, Jonathan Schanzer. Hi, Jonathan.
Hi, John.
And in Israel, the columnist for the Jewish News Syndicate, co-host of the Israel Undiplomatic podcast, and my sister, Ruthie Blum. Hi, Ruthie.
Hi, John.
So, Ruthie, you are in Tel Aviv, and we have been in communication since the middle of the night here in the United States. Just give us a sense. You have the indication as the war started, and you hear the siren, that very familiar siren that says, "Get thee to the bomb shelter." So, where's your bomb shelter, and what's the scene like in your bomb shelter?
Okay, so first of all, my bomb shelter is sort of next door in the building, next door in the basement. It's filthy and it's like falling apart, but it's a bomb shelter. And so all the neighbors in that building and my building can go in there. And I'll tell you the interesting thing about today's first siren is that it wasn't an air raid siren about a missile attack. It was a siren waking everybody up. And keep in mind, because as you pointed out, it was Shabbat. And many people in Israel keep Shabbat. They observe Shabbat. And they keep their radios and televisions on a silent channel that only makes noise when there's an air raid siren. So, but this was a special siren. It sounded just like an air raid siren. And my phone went off like crazy with all these noises. And what it said was, this is the warning before everybody stay near bomb shelters. It wasn't an actual missile barrage. It was there to tell everybody, okay, it's starting. And now everybody make sure that you don't go anywhere. Just stay near where your nearest bomb shelter is. And then you'll be able to get there in the amount of time you need. And everybody needs a different amount. Like I have in Tel Aviv, you have a minute and a half. There are places where they have less time. For example, during the Gaza war, people in the south, in southern Israel, had sometimes 30 seconds or 20 seconds to get to a bomb shelter. Right. Anyway, so this siren went off.
Like it was 8:30 in the morning, Israel time.
Yeah. So I was asleep. I had been up really late at night. I was asleep, and then I heard the siren and the noise and everything. I didn't have my glasses on, and I thought there was an air raid, so I was looked for my shoes and grabbed a coat because I wasn't really dressed properly to go in public, and ran downstairs to go to the bomb shelter. And then I realized nobody was running. Nobody was there. And then I read on my phone that it said, this is just a preparation siren. And so, but about half an hour later, there was an actual air raid siren. So I did have a chance to quickly get dressed and all that. Right. But since then, for 12 hours, I would say there wasn't a half an hour straight when I didn't have to keep going back to that bomb shelter. So you stay in the shelter until it says the coast is clear and you can leave. Right. And then, go back home, and then you say, okay, I'll take a breather. And then before you know it, another one all day long. Right now is the longest. So
you said, right. So you said, you kept texting and saying, big barrage, huge boom, really big boom. Looks like they're really firing stuff. Now the boom, which we talked about during the Gaza war, the boom is a success, not a failure. The boom is the interception. So even though the boom is a scary noise, it's actually an indication that a mission has been accomplished and an incoming projectile has been taken out. So it's a kind of weird thing that the thing that sounds like a bomb going off is actually a sign that the bomb has been prevented.
Correct. But I have to, with one caveat, and on October 7th, when Hamas committed the massacre, and then there were missiles all over and rockets, actually one did hit right next to my building, and all my windows exploded and everything. So that was an actual hit. It wasn't intercepted. We have had noises like that.
But the huge,
and also with drones. We also had a drone hit a building a couple of blocks away from my building. There are cases where there are hits, but mostly the booms are interceptions. And by the way, they tell us, don't go out for several minutes after you hear, after the sirens, and they say stay in until we tell you the coast is clear, because the interceptions are very dangerous. If you've ever seen a piece of shrapnel, it's not some teeny little thing. Some of those look like missiles themselves.
Indeed, it appears from what we hear that a lot of the damage outside of Israel and outside of Iran, in Dubai in particular, against a couple of these hotels, may have been the result of shrapnel falling as the result of a successful interception. Particularly this, I think the Fairmont Hotel appears to have been hit by the after effect. So we do have literal evidence of that today. Now, speaking of that, Jonathan Schanzer, we somehow seem to take it as a given, though I think it is a fascinating given. Okay, so Iran is engaged by the United States and Israel in a war. And Iran says, as is understandable, if this is the case, then there are no red lines. There are legitimate targets against the people who have come to attack us. But as seems to be typical of this kind of irredentist regime that observes no rules of human conduct of any sort, they go into this war by firing at Bahrain, Dubai, Oman, maybe not Oman. I mean, so there are like 5, aside from specific American-based targets. They're just spraying fire across the Gulf and in the Middle East, including hitting countries that are not involved, which should give us a sense of now. So no one's really making a big point about this, but to me, it's like, yeah, okay, this regime really has got to be destroyed. Like they'll do anything. They'll shoot at anybody, including people who are just standing there, not really involved.
Yes, that's what's happening. And I mean, look, the list is Bahrain, including residential, towers, but also the Fifth Fleet base did take some incoming early on in the first hours of the war. Kuwait has been hit. Their airport was hit in Kuwait. And then on top of that, I've actually seen a video of a missile falling in Qatar, which is really interesting, and a huge explosion resulting from it. There was an attack reportedly in Iraq on a U.S. or possibly U.S. and Israeli base in Erbil in Kurdistan. But yeah, you can see, and the Jordanians have shot down more than 50 projectiles that have gone through their airspace. So there's a lot of activity going on right now, and the Arabs actually seem to be coalescing around this. Everybody's been talking about how the Saudis and the Emiratis have been at loggerheads over the last several weeks. They're issuing statements right now where like they're talking about their coordination and how they have solidarity between the two countries. The Qataris and the Jordanians are not big fans of the Qataris. They're issuing statements right now. So what we're watching, and I think maybe this might be sometimes hard to get our heads wrapped around, but the Iranians are, I think, in some ways unifying the Arab world, and maybe even unifying this idea that the U.S.-led alliance, which includes Israel, also includes the Arab world. So guys hang together or hang separately, I think, is kind of the message that's coming through right now. And the Arabs appear to be buying into this. So I think there's some positive stuff happening in addition to the strikes that we're watching on the regime in Iran.
Okay,
I have a follow-up question on that? Just quickly, Jonathan, is Iran hitting all these other targets because they believe that there is some tactical value to doing so, or is it that their capacity for precision is just gone or failing?
Yeah, and I think it's an interesting question. When you look at what has been on fire in Dubai, for example, dangerously close to Burj Al Khalifa, the tallest tower in the world, right? So from my vantage point, it looks like they have a fair amount of precision here, and they're trying to topple the largest tower in the world. This is like the Iranians trying to replicate 9/11 here in New York and to have some kind of a shocking display of Iranian strength. I think in other places you see them wildly missing the mark. But I think what needs to be understood here, and I think let me bring this back to Israel for a minute. There have only been 180 missiles fired at Israel as of 2:00 on Saturday afternoon Eastern time. 180 is far fewer than anybody thought. As I understand it right now, a lot of that has to do with the fact that the Israelis have been able to target a lot of the more dangerous missiles, specifically the solid fuel missiles, where they can pull them out of the underground bunkers and then just simply light a fuse and let it launch, as opposed to what now they're firing, which is the liquid fuel, they're less stable, a little bit harder to steer in the right direction. In other words, the aiming capabilities. But by the way, it also is taking them 2 to 3 hours to fuel these missiles before they can be launched. So what we're watching is a little bit, there's always a technical component to this, but it really does look like the regime is losing capabilities the longer this thing goes on. So as we're recording this, it's about 12 hours into the operation. And it certainly does. There have been a few direct hits in Israel. There have been a few direct hits in the Arab world. But one does not get the sense here that the regime is able to do as much as it did in June of last year. Now, there is one open question. And a friend of mine in Israel, we were talking about this just a little while ago. Are they saving up certain capabilities for when their backs are truly up against the wall? Nobody knows. But this is what the Israelis are seeing right now. They're seeing a regime that doesn't have the same kind of capabilities that they did a year ago.
Also, by the way, I just like to add something to that, Jonathan, and that is that so far, neither the Houthis in Yemen nor Hezbollah in Lebanon have joined in this attack. And in the days leading up and in the month and a half since President Trump said help is on the way, Israel has been saying that it is prepared for the Houthis and Hezbollah to join in when and if Iran attacks.
Two things. One, I just want to explain to people, if you're hearing a weird tone during the course of this podcast, that is Ruthie's phone. She has to keep it on because that is how she gets alerts in case she has to go to a shelter. So she's getting messages. She can't turn it entirely off. And so if you hear that noise, that's why it's there. It's her early warning system. Not that those tones mean that the bomb alert has come along. Second, during the last week, there were massive bombardment strikes in Lebanon on Hezbollah positions. Was one of the signs that maybe something was really imminent, that Israel had taken made those moves. And of course, the mission appears to have begun with Israeli action, and that the targeting of the Khamenei family and the Khamenei compound was Israeli and not American. This is very, very important because it suggests a level of sophistication, moral, strategic, and tactical, this plan that people I assume they'll give them credit for it later, but Donald Trump and the Americans have been insisting that our purpose in the United States, our purpose is not regime change. We want there to be regime change. Trump said in his speech overnight that when we're done, the Iranians should take back their country from the regime. But regime change would be, we're on the ground, we're going to go in, take out people, establish a regency, set things up for elections. He's like, we're doing this, and when we're done, things are going to be sufficiently, ruined for the Islamic Republic that you can go in and sweep it up and take charge of your own destiny. But we're there to get the ballistic missiles, the intercontinental missiles, and the nuclear program and take them out. Yes. Israel is doing the regime change.
Yes.
That these
Actually,
missions
John,
have been divided. So
so the division of labor, and it's really interesting, actually, again, speaking to an Israeli contact just really minutes before we started recording, what I heard was the U.S. military is targeting the nuclear sites, whatever is left, whatever they think may be used in future endeavors for the nuclear program, and other military infrastructure that could threaten the United States or threaten our allies around the region. And then the Israelis are targeting the top leadership of the regime. And by the way, as we speak, I'm watching on Channel 11 Israel that there are celebrations in Iran after the belief that Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran, was killed. The Channel 11 says they have some video evidence of this. I have not seen it yet because it just popped up on my screen. But anyway, this is part of what Israel's doing. And there are other top military figures and IRGC figures that have apparently been killed by the Israelis in the first 12 hours of this war. But the other thing that they're doing is they are hunting the missiles, because it's the missiles that can do damage, strategic damage to the state of Israel, and of course to the other Arab states in the region. And so this is the division of labor for day one. Right. Now, what to me is going to be interesting is and I don't think it's going to take days and days for the United States to go hunting the nuclear sites. So the question is, as we head into day two, what is the United States going to do next? What are we looking for while the Israelis continue to go hunt for those missiles or for those top figures? That's going to be, I think, an interesting question, because Trump kind of made it like, hey, we're just going to do this for right now. And there's a very specific kind of MAGA reason for this. There's only the American interest. This is what we're doing. But I got to say, in for a penny, in for a pound, by tomorrow, there will be new targets for the United States to consider.
Can I just ask a question on that? Just before I got on here, I was watching, there's some reports that Trump was talking about a conversation that he's had with regional leaders about possible off-ramps. So I'm guessing what you just said, we shouldn't make too much of that, other than Donald Trump will talk about whatever has just happened or come up.
Well, so let me just say, there is fear among some in Israel that this is the limited strike that Donald Trump talked about last week, the week before. He repeatedly said, hey, we might just do a limited strike. Limited strike doesn't mean just one strike. It could be 1 day of strikes, 3 days of strikes. And then he calls the remaining leaders of Iran back to the negotiating table to find out whether they're more flexible, to find out whether they're more pragmatic. The Israelis are very nervous about the prospect of this, I think for obvious reasons, because every time the regime has come to the table, they have fleeced the United States. We walk out without our pants on, and the regime walks away pocketing concessions. Now, I will say, we've never done this before, where, we have taken out top leaders, taken out key assets of the regime, and then said, okay, guys, your back's up against the wall. We've got a gun to your head, and now negotiate. And so that's interesting, but I will say the Israelis don't like it at all. They are very nervous about it.
Okay, so it is apparently in an interview that Trump did with Barak Ravid of Axios, in which he talked about off-ramps. But in classic Trump fashion, he said, I could go all out for a couple of days and then pull back, or we could just go until we're done, or something like that. So I don't think any of this means anything in that sense. And of course, success breeds success. So there are two ways of looking at success, one of which is Trump goes, I did it. We did it. Like we really slaughtered them and did. We've. He said in the speech, like there's blood and guts all over the floor, or something like that. Literally, he used the phrase "blood and guts." So I don't have to do any more, or it could be like, it's like shooting fish in a barrel. Let's keep going. We got no resistance, and there's no resistance. Like there may be missiles flying.
Here's the middle ground, and this is what I'm watching. Okay, there's the we're going to stop because we can. There's the we're going to keep going because we can. The middle ground is the Maduro option.
Right.
And I got to say, let's not take our eye off of this ball, because Trump loved what happened in Venezuela, right? You took out top leader of Venezuela, and then you had to deal with the people who were incredibly fearful afterwards that they could be next. And then they start working with the United States in a more pragmatic fashion. This is, I think, what Trump would love to see. Now, let me just say, I don't believe that the regime in Iran is at all like Venezuela. Venezuela is a kleptocracy. It is filled with criminals and opportunists. And the regime in Iran is filled with true believers who've been brought up on this idea of a revolution from the moment they were born.
Right.
But there is still a chance that Trump can pull this off, because nobody wants to watch their country get destroyed. And there will be people who are pragmatic lower down in the IRGC that might be tempted by this. Look, and so that's what I'm watching as the third option.
Right. Well,
I need to make a point here, because we have to say, you say that the Israelis are nervous that Trump that this may happen and he may be doing this to go back to the negotiation table. But that is not how Netanyahu sounded when he gave an address this evening. He addressed the nation and addressed the Iranian people. And what he said was very important, because what he said was, we are giving an off-ramp, not to the Revolutionary Guards and not to the regime, but anybody in the Iranian military he said, we are not against the military and we're not against the people. And you should rise up. And what was significant about it is that this indicates that one of the things that he and Trump spoke about was this business of the day after. Israelis, like everybody, are obsessed with what about the day after. And it seems that what they are planning or hoping for is that members of the military will defect, not the IRCG, that the military will defect, and that there will be some kind of military rule when the regime falls.
Right. So now the thing about the Maduro option, we still don't know if this is the case, but whether it was pre-planned that we were going to extract Maduro and then hand the country over to the vice president as we did, or whether that was happenstance, whether this was, something that had been quietly negotiated with her, and Rubio. I suspect that that's the case. The transition was way too seamless and way too confidently executed for there not to have been pre-planning. Similarly, it seems to me that there has been 2 months, really, almost literally 2 months since December 28th, when the riots started in Iran, that have led to this day, where the rial collapsed and the people started rising up in places no one had ever risen up in Iran before. And then everyone's out in the streets and Trump says, take back your country, help is on the way. And then came the massacre and all this. 2 months. And one of the things we know is that Israel's intelligence capabilities in Iran are nearly supernatural at this point. So assuming that this wasn't just like Trump going on Thursday, all right, let's go, the hell with it. They stink. I don't like these negotiations. I don't like the way they're behaving. We're just going to go. That this has been a much more painstaking period of time in which not only have the Israelis been set at figuring out where and when they can strike in order to get Khamenei immediately at the beginning of the war. And so they say to Trump, we know where he is now. everything's ready, let's go, right? On Friday afternoon or something like that. But it's not just that. Like, everyone's obsessed with the day after. I'm guessing there's a plan for the day after, by which I mean Israel's ability to know what's going on in Iran means that Israel has assets in Iran at very high levels, at very, very, very high levels. They have agents of influence. They have people they bought off. They have people who've been working with them against the regime, not mid-low, even though, as Jonathan, you say, this is an ideologically driven regime with people who are religiously committed to its existence. But it only takes 2 or 3 or 4 people to provide Israel with the intelligence it needs to know where the apartment is that they can hit and what to do them. And therefore, I suspect that there is more foreknowledge of where this could go with regime collapse and regime change, and that's been part of the 2-month planning process.
It has, but let me tell you a little bit of what I've heard. And again, I always deal in scraps of information. I always try to reinforce this because I only see what I can see. I can only hear what I can hear. What I understand is that on Thursday, they did not have a plan. Somewhere between Thursday and Friday, they began to understand that there was going to be a meeting of the top leaders of Iran based on the intelligence network that you just described, John. And once they figured that out, they figured out that overnight on Friday night into Saturday, that was going to be the moment that they struck, because they would be able to take out as many of those top leaders as they could all at once. And just don't forget that the Israelis have done this with the Houthis. They've done it with Hezbollah. They did it during the June war, but they did it in different ways. This was a one-off, one strike, one opportunity, and they apparently did some pretty good work. Now, as for what happens next, that I think it's muddier, okay? But I mean, I do think the Israelis have their list, right? It's their deck of cards, if you will, right? Where they're going to go after the 20, the 50, however many leaders they're going to go after, with the idea that everything below that, they're just going to be dealing with incompetence or fear or pragmatism or some combination thereof. But I do think that there is still concern, and I hear this, all the time from the kind of from the, let's just say, the isolationist wing of the MAGA movement. We don't know who's coming next. We don't know who's going to step up. Let me just say, nobody in their right mind in Iran is going to stick their neck out and proclaim themselves to be the leader of the opposition while the regime is still slaughtering 30,000, 40,000 people on the streets. So there's a little bit of a black box here about what comes next. And you have to understand why there's a black box. Okay, so we have Mossad networks that I think they can mobilize. There are CIA networks that can be mobilized. There's networks associated with the Crown Prince, right, in exile here in the United States that also can be mobilized. But who emerges as a viable leader? No clue. And anybody who says that they know, I got to say, I'm gonna have to question, because of that. Again, that same thing. Nobody wants to stick their necks out, not yet. But I do think that right now, as the reports are circulating that Khamenei's dead, and people are getting a sense that maybe this regime is going to be relegated to the ash heap of history, this might be the moment where you start to see the leaders come out and declare themselves.
By the way, especially since it wasn't only Khamenei pronounced dead, I mean, we hope that that's definitely the case. But there were other leaders. I believe the chief of staff of the army, of the Revolutionary Guards, and a few other people, the defense minister or whatever their titles are. There were quite a few killed.
There were, and actually, yeah. And as we speak right now, I'm watching Effie Defrin, the spokesperson for the IDF, is talking about exactly this: that there were multiple people killed in the initial strikes. And yes, so you're watching the erosion of the regime in real time.
And that's, as you say,
the Iranians are dancing in the streets. They're cheering, and they're cheering for Israel, and it's like amazing.
Right, but again, if this is day one, there are regime assets all over the place, And if Israel, as I believe we know, their special forces are on the ground and they do have a network and all of that, what I guess will be interesting from the larger perspective of history, once, we're 5 years out and if this works well, is who wasn't killed, whom they didn't target.
Right.
So if they are going after the defense minister, but not the deputy defense minister, or they're going after the head of the IGRC, but they're not going after the head of the Basij, or they're going after this one, but they're not going after that one. In that way, you can start picking out who was playing footsie with Israel and the United States and who wasn't, who was hedging their bets or sick of the regime or whatever. And that, of course, will not emerge until the regime appears to be in ruins and rubble.
Yeah.
And I just can't imagine that there isn't an idea in the heads of the people who conducted this, chose to go ahead, that they don't have a day after. Now, the day after plan may be ridiculous. It might be Pahlavi, and maybe that's ridiculous, just like the day after plan in Iraq in 2003 ended up being kind of ridiculous. But here you would at least have Israel's input on who it is that they have been dealing with that can be somebody you can deal with.
Yeah.
Okay, now you have to excuse me. I have to go to the bomb shelter. So
Okay.
I'm just reading.
Okay. So there we go. So Tel Aviv is about to. There's hopefully will be an interception. Yeah. We're gonna leave Ruthie's. If you're watching on YouTube, we're leaving Ruthie's spot open here, so you understand that there is a war going on, and that every civilian in Israel is a combatant in the war, and as has been true of this 7-front Iranian war that began on October 7th. And so here we have visual evidence of that if you are watching.
So let me respond, John, to something that you said. As we wait for hopefully the all clear from Tel Aviv and Ruthie can come back. There's only been one time in modern history, where the Supreme Leader of the Islamic Republic has died. It was 1989. And it was at that moment that the Islamic Republic stood at a crossroads, and we didn't know what would come next. Would the Iranian people rise up and demand something different? Of course, Khamenei died, or Khomeini rather, died by natural circumstances. Khamenei has now been, according to all reports, now liquidated by the Israelis. And it's happening amidst this massive uprising. And so this is, I think this is the moment where the United States, the Israelis, and maybe some others, I'm guessing the Saudis, Azerbaijan, who knows, right? But there's any number of actors that probably have, an idea of what they want next. The question is, how coordinated are they? How well have they planned this out? And to that, I've just got to say, there are a lot of people out there who are, obviously taking shots at Donald Trump, saying that this is seat of the pants. Let me just say, this guy's been this guy's left our forces in the Persian Gulf for 5 weeks, waiting for the plan, waiting for a better plan than what he had when he first sent aircraft into the region. They were 17 minutes away from bombing Iranian targets 5 weeks ago, and he pulled them back, and has been working with the regional players, not just the Israelis, but the Saudis and the Emiratis and the Bahrainis and the Qataris and everybody else, to work through this. So look, I can't tell you that we have a great plan. What I can tell you is it should be a damn sight better than what we had 5 weeks ago. And I hope that that's what we're going to see in the next couple of days.
I just want to add to that, or augment that, by saying, however coordinated or uncoordinated the parties are who are looking to fill the hole of what comes next, or even outside parties outside of the country or whatever, just how coordinated are the remnants of the regime going to be after this incredible immediate decapitation strike? I mean,
well, that's part of the degradation of the capabilities issue that happens as a result. War. It's like not only does observing something change things, but when you change things, things change down the road. So if you are taking out leaders of who can actually who have line authority to make decisions about where to fire the ballistic missiles or what to do with this or what to do with that, you take them out, you degrade the capability in that way. And then as things go on and you find the physical sites and you bomb them, and then maybe you are starting to go down in the deck of cards to the second level and all of that, and you've taken out the internet and you've taken out the command control and communications capabilities of the regime, which I read we've done, but I mean, that would make perfect sense that that's the first thing that we would target with our, discombobulation devices and other things, that they literally aren't in touch. They can't pick up the phone and call the secret location where some secret battery of ballistic missiles is and says, okay, put in the telemetry and fire them, because they can't get in touch. So who's going to make that decision?
And you have to figure that at some point they say, do I dare even try to get in touch? I mean,
yeah, right. Yeah,
because the minute I pop up on the radar.
Yeah, I say something, I get geolocated, and then boom, someone drops a bomb on my head.
So, but now here's the other thing that, and I've been thinking a lot about this just over the last couple of hours, because look, from all indication, it looks like the regime's getting shellacked, and with the United States and Israel involved. From the outset, this isn't like Israel doing it and then the United States coming in with the punctuation point at the end, like we saw in June. This is the U.S., they're doing as many sorties as the Israelis are. And the Israelis have had 200 aircraft dropping like 600 bombs or something, just in the first 10, 12 hours. And if the United States is doing the same with bigger bombs and aircraft that can deliver more powerful, ordnance. This is a serious thing, right? And you don't expect these guys to hang on for long. What I am worried about right now are two things related to kind of the underground operations of the regime. One is, what do they have here in the United States? You want to think about the sleeper cells, the assassins for hire. We've seen it before, right? They've targeted the Israeli ambassador, the Saudi ambassador. They've gone after Masih Alinejad, the famous Iranian activist against the regime. Not to mention Mike Pompeo, Brian Hook, and a handful of others. I'm worried about that as an asymmetric response that I think can be ordered by somebody lower down in that, within the echelons of the IRGC. And so I would keep an eye on that. And by the way, that's exactly the kind of stuff that would erode the confidence of the neo-isolationist right within the MAGA movement. That's exactly the kind of thing where they would say, Trump, I told you so. This is not in the American interest. We told you not to do it, right? So there's that. The other thing that I think about right now, when I think about where do things go wrong? Well, just so you know, right, we always talk about me as the morose guy on this program when you bring me on. I'm worried also about what happens if the IRGC guys melt away while this thing is going on, and then
like Iraq in 2003, like the Iraqi army in the north.
And they come back knowing where the remnants of the military equipment, where they are, where some of these missiles and rockets are, or some of the other things that might be useful for attacks against American forces in the region, or attacks against a regime that we're trying to put together. And you got to remember, the Iranians, we talk a lot about regime change and how it's a dirty term in the United States, and we don't like to talk about regime change anymore. There's a reason why we failed in Iraq and Afghanistan. And it all tracks back to the Islamic Republic. I mean, they ensured our failure, and they can do it again on their own home turf. I'm assuming they can do it easier that way. So, I mean, I think that on the one hand, I think we've got a lot to be optimistic about, as we've talked about. You get a sense of how their ranks are thinning out and who knows what's left. And maybe there's a Maduro option. But don't forget that there are these sort of black swan things that we've not yet tested that I think there's plenty of reason to be concerned about them.
I just to say, as a political matter, and this isn't particularly heartening, because of the way Trump has framed this as we are not doing the regime change. That's on you. You've asked the United States for something for decades. We're finally giving it to you. I mean, this is almost exactly what he said. Let's see what you do with it. Should there be a failure to replace the regime with something, anything more friendly and amenable to our interests and to those of our allies, it's not exactly our failure this time. Hope there's no failure, obviously.
What I would just say here is that this is not an American-led effort at regime change. I think the administration has made that clear. However, if you see, for example, attacks against the homeland, attacks against American bases that are successful, attacks against oil installations that are successful, that send the price of oil sky high, right? Attacks at home here by Iranian sleeper cells or agents of the regime, that will not help Donald Trump, right? As a man who says we are winning, right, or we have won, this will be a counter narrative to what he has put out there. And that's what I think I'm concerned about. I think the Iranians understand this. It's easy to spoil things for an American politician, right? And so even if you've lost, you can still score some victories. And that's what I'm concerned that the regime may try to do. But look, I would also argue that if the people come out and, take charge of the streets, and more importantly, that we see elements of the Basij or the security services, the police, the army, the IRGC, if anybody switches sides,
right,
this is the major victory that the Israelis and the Iranian people have been waiting for. So there's lots of different ways this thing plays out, I think is kind of what I'm trying to drive home here.
So I don't want to be Pollyanna-ish, and I do think that the idea 12 hours into a massive military operation that we're already projecting out the inevitable end of the regime and history shining down glowingly. History doesn't move in a straight line. Things don't end up the way you want them to end up, but we do have the history of the years since October 7th. And October 7th was this, brilliantly staged monstrous surprise attack that took the nation of Israel by surprise. That was, a traumatizing event that will, resound for decades inside the, Israeli body politic and the culture. But what we've seen in the last 2 years is this Iranian seven-front war systematically crushed with very little response once the attack of October 7th happened. The Hezbollah beepers and the targeting of the neighborhood in Beirut that took out the Hezbollah leadership, Operation number 1, the fall of the regime in Syria, number 2, the Houthi leaders taken out and firing relatively ineffectively, drones from 900 miles away. Number 3, the after efforts to ruin shipping in the Gulf, we got control back of Gulf shipping, and Iran's efforts directly to engage with Israel, leading to almost no death in Israel, and then ultimately this crushing humiliation in Operation Midnight Hammer. So that I bring this up only to say that there doesn't seem to be a lot of evidence that this seven front war had a lot of second strike capability. And if we are going at them full bore with two nations, the two best militaries in the world, functioning in lockstep. I mean, not lockstep because they're not doing it all together, but but just basically in harmony. How they pop their heads up and start doing things they could have been doing already, when they may not even know. We don't know who's going to say, "Oh, sleeper cell in Kansas City, go do your mission at that mall," in Independence, or go to somebody's doorstep in in AU Park and do an assassination or something like that. It may not even be that the people who are there to make the call can make the call if those cells exist. Russia does it. Russia has projected its terrorist power outside its borders consistently for the last 10 or 15 years, killing people in England and elsewhere and using poison-tipped umbrellas and whatever else. And the Iranians have taken shots at, or seem to have tried to take shots at, you mentioned Brian Hook, Bolton, Pompeo, Trump, all of that, with no success. Are they suddenly going to get good at it?
Yeah, and John, I don't know the answer to that question.
No, I'm just throwing that out. I don't want to Pollyanna it. I'm just saying.
But I think, let me just say, I think you're asking the right questions. And I do wonder whether the regime has any of this capability right now. I point out some of the possible negative outcomes here, just to note that, yes, we are watching the United States and Israel, after years of practicing military maneuvers together, actually doing this thing and doing it well. I'm just looking for, because I never trust any success. This is just sort of, I'm sorry, but it's just, I guess, my nature at this point. I'm wondering where the pitfalls might be, but really right now it does look like things are going well. And with Khamenei gone, and with other top leaders gone, you can't imagine the regime coming back easily from this.
Can I just add, also, not to be Pollyannish, but I think there are two other fortuitous elements here, hopefully, in regard to the possibility of some sort of attack on the homeland here. One is that it's good that this happened after Trump has sealed the leaks in the border. And the second is that it's good that this happened after the Maduro operation, because of Venezuela's ties with all the militant groups associated with Iran. There's a sort of that the pipeline of terrorist militants into the U.S. was, we don't know who got in before, but was stopped some time ago.
So what we're talking about here really is this question of what to fear. I mean, you can't fear what we don't know, but what second strike capabilities Iran has, and what it has buried, or what, as you mentioned, what missiles with liquid fuel or not liquid fuel, where they are, whether they're going to be sort of brought out from their tunnels in a way that means that they're not spotted, so that they can be taken out on the ground and all of that, and then they can fire them off and see what kind of damage they can do. That's where, but the thing is, if your first strike is really effective, that affects the ability of the second strike. It's not like the second strike isn't connected to the first strike. The second strike is it's like in a classic battle, you have, the people at the phalanx at the front lines moves in, and then it engages in fighting, and then, oh my God, there's a whole other line behind it we didn't see, and they're going to come in and mop it up. There's no such second line that maybe there is. That's what I'm saying. It would be a weird thing to like hold it in abeyance, or think, okay, now we can use it with our top leaders gone. Like, who's Khamenei now that he's gone? This is a totalitarian top-down dictatorship that has had two leaders in 47 years, both of whose names began with the letters KH and the word Ayatollah. And right now, I know it's only been a couple of hours since Khamenei has, but in a functioning regime, in any kind of functioning long-term government, the minute the government is, if Kennedy is assassinated, there's Johnson to be sworn in. If a queen dies, the king takes over. If we have no idea, and I don't think the Iranians have any idea. And it may have been that his son-in-law was going to be the guy to take over, or his son, and they may both have been eliminated in this strike today. And so somebody's got to take charge of the second strike and say, you know what? Oh my God, we're seeing. We have some information that the base in Bahrain, there's a route in from the south. If we can just turn around and hit from the south, they're not defended there. Where are they going to have that?
Yeah,
who are their eyes on the ground around the U.S. bases to kill people on the U.S. bases?
So let me just say, as you're speaking, John, I do see a direct strike by the Iranians on a building in Tel Aviv. They were able to score one. I think it's important to understand that even though the U.S. and Israel are getting the best of the Iranians, they still have some capabilities that they're still going to be able to bring to bear on the battlefield. And this, I think, will give the Iranians some time to try to, let's say, you're not going to see capitulation over several days because they're still able to fight back. That will give them some time to think through what that, what succession looks like, what the chain of command looks like. If there are internal battles that are taking place between the IRGC and the clerics, they're playing out right now. I think we can actually help exacerbate some of those tensions. And I'm sure we're doing that right now through information operations, through cyber means, and Lord knows what else. But I think there's still a bunch of this war that needs to be fought. That's
here's my question to you then.
3 days to 3 weeks of fighting.
So here's my question to you. You mentioned that when we began the podcast, that as far as you know, about 180 missiles had been fired by Iran. And in the last couple of minutes, as we're talking, there's been a major barrage, not only at Israel, but at other places around the region. So do we have any sense of how many ballistic missiles they still have in their arsenal after Operation Midnight Hammer? I mean, Is it thousands? Is it tens of thousands? I mean, in other words, if they've fired off 400 missiles, how much of a bite is that on their overall missile capacity?
Yeah. So what they had during Midnight Hammer, Rising Lion, they had somewhere around 2,500 to 3,000, and they were able to pop off 500, 600 of them, maybe even a few more than that. And they got some direct hits. And by the way, they were quite good at the aiming. They got better over time, so that they actually hit the Kiryat, the defense ministry in Israel. They came unbelievably close, probably 100 yards from hitting the head of the Air Force, the headquarters of the Air Force. They got pretty close to hitting the Mossad during one of the previous rounds of fighting I think in 2024. They came pretty close to the Mossad. So they were pretty good at aiming some of these. Now, my understanding is that the missiles that they've had to replace with Chinese missiles primarily. That because the Israelis took out a lot of their own production capabilities, that were domestic, that were indigenous, they have had to do other things. So right now, my understanding is they have somewhere between 5,000 and 7,000 missiles, or at least they did before the fighting started. So there were more, but as we just discussed, not as many of the solid fuel, which means they're going to take longer to launch and they can be hit on the ground because they're vulnerable. There's also a question of whether they're still able to manipulate the physics of these things in the way that they did before. In other words, they were getting really good at aiming with the missiles that they had developed. Right now, they may be dealing with missiles that they don't know as well. So it's a big open question as to how many of these things are they going to be able to pop off. The last thing that I'll just note is the number that they're able to fire directly correlates to the number of missile launchers that they have. Now, these are either the mobile ones where they're on a truck and, everybody's seen it where, they raise it to a certain level. There's the angle and then they maneuver the truck so that it's going in the right direction. And then they fuel it and then they set it off. So there are those. And then there are the more stationary ones, which the Israelis are also hunting. There's something like 500 of those. So they're like, 1/10 of the total amount of the missiles. If you can destroy the missile launchers, then the missiles become obsolete. And so this explains a little bit of the hunting expedition that the Israeli Air Force is on right now. As they're also looking to target the individuals, they're looking to target the missiles and the missile launchers to defang that threat. So then they have total air superiority. And I think, by the way, some people in Israel think they're going to have it by tomorrow, which is fascinating.
So this stands as a remarkable moment, and I want to talk about, but just before we go, about the larger geopolitical implications. I wrote a blog post this morning, which is on our site at commentary.org, and I wrote a sentence that a couple of people wrote to me and said, "What do you mean by that?" In which I said, this may be the most important day of the 21st century. And I would just briefly explain it and then see what you have to say about that. For 50 years, almost 50 years, or more than 50 years, really dating back to the Arab oil embargo of 1973, America and the West's relation to the Middle East has been the bedeviling feature of Western civilization. We have been involved in the Middle East in ways that we did not seek, nor do we wish particularly to be involved with, but that, as Michael Corleone says in Godfather Part 3, they keep pulling us back in. We didn't seek the oil embargo. They imposed it on us. We didn't seek, we basically let the Pahlavi regime fall in Iran, not seeking engagement with what was to follow. They took our hostages. We did not seek to have a conflict with Saddam Hussein. He went into Kuwait. We did not seek to engage Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda hits Khobar Towers. Al-Qaeda hits us on 9/11. We did not seek to engage with Afghanistan, but Afghanistan harbored Al-Qaeda. We had to move on Al-Qaeda. We went into Iraq. We stayed in Afghanistan. We are now engaged in this effort with Iran. Should the Iranian threat be eliminated? I even mentioned the 8-year war between Iran and Iraq that really was of no strategic interest to us all that much, except that it engaged two bad actors together, but in which millions of people were killed for no result whatsoever, for no good result, for no purpose whatsoever. We end a period of time in the world that has been the sort of the anchor on our foreign policy, shackled in our foreign policy to this question of America, the West, the oil, the Islamic radicalism in infiltrating the West and starting to now turn European countries in this way. The result of a successful effort to get this regime out finally after 47 years that has been at war with us, declaring us the great Satan and, conducting these measures and works against us. The geopolitical implications of this are so large. It's so freeing. It's so liberating that, and it will allow us to focus, concentrate, and develop our capabilities militarily and geopolitically and strategically without reference to the one thing that was always shadowing and on top of our heads.
Yeah.
So yes.
It's a great point to make. It's a great blog post. It's a great thesis. I want to to footstep a few things and maybe even take it a step further. Number one, Iran has stood behind all of the non-state actors that we've been battling, including those on the Sunni side of the street, so to speak. I mean, we know that Al-Qaeda and Iran actually collaborated. And I saw some of the evidence when I worked at the Treasury Department some 20 years ago in the height of the war on terror. You could see it. It wasn't as if the Iranians had clean hands as it related to Al-Qaeda and its war against the West.
I mean, on the grounds that Iran is a Shia regime and Al-Qaeda was a Sunni movement.
Correct.
And in theory, they should have been at daggers drawn, but in fact, they had common cause in the great Satan.
Enemy of my enemy. Yeah. Well, bring together Sunni and Shiite. The sectarian divide doesn't exist, and we've seen it. And Hezbollah, right? That's an Iranian actor. Hamas, an Iranian actor. Shiite militia. But like, look at what we did in Iraq and Afghanistan. The insurgencies that were launched against us, in part, sometimes in whole, with Iranian support. So every time we've lost blood, treasure, limbs in the Middle East, you could track it back to the Islamic Republic. And the idea that we would bring down this regime and the proxy network that came with it is an enormous opportunity for the United States to turn a page from a pretty dark chapter in American history, dealing with all manner of just terrible actors, but again, all tracking back to the regime.
Can I
want to draw this out for just another minute. I think there's an opportunity in bringing this down. It's not just what we're getting rid of. There is the possibility of helping to push the Israelis, the Emiratis, the Bahrainis, the Saudis, if they want to join, this idea of the Abrahamic alliance that could fill the void in the Middle East and turn it from something that has been a basket case to something that is far more forward-leaning and pro-America. But that will require effort on the part of the United States. It will also require us to keep certain jackals at bay. And here I'm talking about Muslim Brotherhood type regimes like the Turks and the Qataris. They would love nothing more than to fill the void. So whatever we do, the hard work doesn't end here, right? The hard work actually begins after you topple the regime. And what are you going to put in its place? The last thing that I think we need to just acknowledge here, and at FDD we've done a lot of work on this idea of an axis that exists out there in the world. It's China, Russia, and Iran working together, right? They're a three-legged stool. If we kick out one of those legs, it does raise some really interesting questions about the great power competition and the challenges that we have in front of us. The supplier of oil and drones to the likes of the Chinese and the Russians, their ability to draw our attention away from them and to the Middle East, with Iran creating mayhem all the time. We have interesting opportunities globally, far beyond the Middle East right now. And so when you talk about the moment of opportunity, it is even beyond the enormity that you have described.
I was actually going to make that point about the Russians and the Chinese. So,
well, by the way, so in the final, just to get into the like rank, internal conservative, squabbling. The isolationists in the United States, or the fake people who are isolationists but claim not to be isolationists in the United States, the Quincy Institute, various others, who are obviously will be stalwartly opposed to this effort. Their claim often, if they're saying they're not isolationists and they're not pacifists, is we need to focus on China. We have to focus on the threat from China. We have to focus on the threat from China. You know what? I agree. We have to focus on the threat from China is the great competitor of the 21st century. We have to focus on the threat from China. We have to make sure that China stays within its borders and doesn't take Taiwan and doesn't destabilize the South China Sea and doesn't start to try to dominate Japan and the Korean Peninsula and elsewhere in their region. One of the ways we can do that is by moving past this concentration on the Middle East that has been our enduring every single presidency, every single leader has either it's about Arab countries and our relation to them, or it was the great distraction of the last 50 years, which is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And we need to solve that in order to move on to help solve the other problems in order to this and that and the other thing. And here we are in 2026 with a real possibility, not of this going off the board and that it no longer is a problem. That's not what I'm saying. But if what we really need to do is not be distracted from the great power rivalry that is this century's issue, we got to clear the decks, because clearly we have a problem with attention span in the United States, and we have a problem with understanding, who our enemies are and who our friends, and how to deal with them. And so just there, the idea that the people who say that they're America first don't understand that it is America first to get rid of the Iranian threat, because it means that we can, the amount of CIA, Treasury Department, State Department, energy, focus, obsession with all of the ancillary things that go on with this throughout my lifetime is incomparable. And so moving it into a subsidiary or tertiary position while we focus on the real problem is deeply in the American interest.
It deeply is. There is no doubt about that in my mind. And being able to put this in the rear view and to create, again, something that is, going to be advocating for American values and American interests in its place will be of paramount importance after this. So there will need to be more work. There is an interesting question. And to me, the question is, if we do think about rebuilding, and I know Donald Trump is, chomping at the bit for this, right? It could be $10 billion, or rather $10 trillion of reconstruction, 10 trillion with a T, right? The energy, the rebuilding of the army, the rebuilding of the civilian air fleet, the bridges and tunnels and hospitals and roads and everything that is that in the American interest? Is that America first? Is that why he did it? These are the questions that I think we're going to have to start to answer, because what we don't want, and this gets back to, John, to your point, do we want China to take that business? Absolutely, we do not, right? So this will become a business thing soon. And, I hope it stays calm as we think about doing this, because then we're back in the business of state building. And it gets right back to that thorny question between the isolationists and the interventionists. And this is where it gets perilous, in my view.
Jonathan Schanzer, thank you. My sister Ruthie, where I assume safely in her shelter, is thank you also for being on, and as ever. And a tribute, by the way, to Ruthie's son, Noam Blum, who is now the chief technology officer of Commentary Magazine, who took off his Saturday afternoon to produce this podcast, and is, of course, monitoring all of these developments for us. So here with Abe, John Podhoretz, keep the candle burning.